Okay, thank you very much for inviting us. It's a pleasure to be here. I hope you've still got some brain cells left, because we'd love to be able to break a tradition and present in Greek, but unfortunately we're not going to. We're going to stick with the English technique of speaking English wherever we go. Modelling the near future, collision and mutation. We'd like to talk a little bit about our design process and the idea about trying to find out what's in the near future. So Tom and I met in 1997. We formed the studio. Sorry, I got that wrong. We actually met in 1990, about that, at the Royal College of Art. I was doing furniture design, he was doing product design. And prior to that, we'd both swapped. So I did product design and then he'd done furniture design. And in fact, our sort of first collision was meeting each other. And Tom turned up with a pint of beer in the studio and wanted to talk to me. And he was in another department, and I thought this was a bit odd. But actually, it was the beginning of a friendship and a dialogue, which we still have today, which was about trying to understand what the big picture is. So this slide is very meaningful for us. I think as designers, it's very easy to become very myopic and start focusing on a particular idea, when actually the big picture can furnish you with a sense of perspective which changes what you think you knew. And out of this, we find opportunities for design. This is an example maybe where the big picture changes things. This is a picture of a London bus map. So it's the digital landscape showing the frequency and density of the trips that the buses take. Now, up until 3 or 4 years ago, the buses didn't have GPS, so we didn't know what this picture looked like. Now we have this, we get a different understanding of the kind of network of the buses flowing around London. It changes our perspective. And I think perspective is critical for designers in terms of it allows us to really focus on the detail. It also allows us to understand the context. Is it even relevant that I'm looking at this over here and we have something doing something similar over here? So these 5 plugs which connect things into a wall are seemingly on the surface, at a glance, all very similar, but clearly the differences allow them to perform a different task. And we're very interested in that. But ultimately, as designers, we're interested in designing things for people. It's about promoting functionality, it's about supporting needs, it's about trying to find out what's natural, and understanding how people behave and why they behave in a certain way. This is an image we've used often to sort of talk about the peculiarities of human nature. The confessional, pulling a curtain, having a small screen between 2 people allows somebody the confidence to tell their secrets. But the studio was founded in a very profound sort of passion for furniture design. And I think listening to the talks today has been very interesting in terms of building cities and supporting the landscape that supports interaction between people. But actually for us it starts at a very sort of tactile human scale, which is furniture. And furniture is ultimately about people, product and place. It's obviously about us because we interact with it. It's obviously about place because furniture is designed for locations and it's always different. And ultimately you end up with product. So it's a visceral, physical thing. And the history of furniture is extraordinary too. We're in a very accelerated rate of change at the moment, but if we look back historically, furniture's moved very, very slowly, to the point where we can identify certain chairs from certain villages that were designed by certain fishermen and craftsmen. So a particular wood, a particular process, or a particular function and culture develop an archetype. And these historically moved very, very slowly. The other thing that's very interesting about furniture is everybody's an expert. All of us have experienced it from birth. We sit in chairs, we work at tables, and we'll do that until we die. And so, although we're not formally educated, all of us have an opinion, which is fascinating. So the idea of touch is critical. You've all been sitting all afternoon and you probably can't wait to get up and walk around. And so the physicality of the object is really important. The other thing that's amazing is that it's a human scale. Somehow, because we all use it, we all understand it. We've witnessed a lot of people buying furniture. The very first thing they do is go up and touch it. Then they sit down, and then they do this peculiar thing where they get on their hands and knees and look underneath it. It's as if they need to trust it somehow. So there's something very connected about furniture to people. So for us, the act of making is core to everything that we do, but actually it's human nature to make things, so it's core for everybody. And it's one of the things that differentiates us between other animals. You know, language probably isn't a differentiator anymore, the more we find out. But actually designing our landscape, designing the environment that we live in and making it fit for purpose is something that's probably uniquely human. Most animals can only do one thing. And this creativity seems to be boundless. And at the moment we've got this extraordinary overlap of abilities, some going back 50,000 years when we were painting caves, and others we can't begin to even, imagine what the future outcomes might be. We've got art, which seemingly can offer no purpose other than just emotional fulfillment. We've got craft traditions, which become art through time. We've got this extraordinary event where the whole world is now colliding, communicating, producing industrial production by communicating. I'll make this, you make that, and we'll bring it together somewhere else in the world. And then we've got this new thing, artificial intelligence, information in the digital age, which is enabling these things to happen at a rate we've never experienced before. So the big picture for us is fascinating because it's about looking out, but it's also trying to understand what these little collisions are that might be happening on the pavement, in the morning or on the tube, wherever we might come into contact with other things and other people. This is an image of Shibuya in Tokyo, this wonderful crossing where thousands of people mingle and walk at each other all at the same time. It kind of represents this collision process for us. And the rate of change that we're experiencing is absolutely unprecedented. Typically human beings have experienced a very, very slow progression. But over the last 200 years, it's been absolutely exponential. And it's got to the point now where we literally can't keep up with the number of new things that are happening on a daily basis. We're bombarded with opportunity and information. So this quote, "The pace of change will never again be as slow as it is today," it's probably quite difficult to translate. It hurts my brain doing it in English, but it's really fascinating. So a few facts. 65% of children entering primary school today will ultimately end up working in completely new jobs that don't yet exist. The gig economy, 40% of the US workforce will be independent contractors in 2022. So the idea of getting a job and working for somebody for life may be over. But ironically, if you glance back 200 years before the Industrial Revolution, most people worked for themselves anyway. We have short memories and we adapt to change very, very quickly. The other thing that's going to be very interesting in the future is the fact that the Internet of Things, all these analog, stationary, dumb objects that we've historically lived with will suddenly be imbued with technology, informing somebody somewhere about our daily lives, and that will have an influence too and change the way we live. So, a big theme of our presentation today is change and how we need to and how we can make use of that change. And, clearly, Greece as a country, Athens as a city, has experienced maybe more disruption and confusion and turmoil since the financial crisis than any country probably in Europe and possibly around the world. And that's just one sort of microcosm of the change that is actually happening on a global level. And if we bring together technology, demographics, social change, cultural change, political change, economic change, these are the things that are coming at us, as Luke said, at a monumental speed. And we are both, it's a responsibility of ours, and also it's an opportunity of ours to make use of that change and to sort of mould it and form it into something that becomes powerful for us as designers and creators of cities and spaces. Change, by definition, has a hugely disruptive influence. It challenges the status quo, and it also models new behaviours. So who would have thought that 10 years ago this would be the vision of a concert or a stage performance when everyone is just experiencing that thing through their digital device? It's a very perplexing and very sort of alien idea, and yet somehow we're all drawn into this new culture of a digital existence next to an analog existence. And that's just a very simple example of how behaviours
are not modelled by us as groups. They're accidental outcomes from the change that is going on around us. We, as a studio, are really fascinated by, we intentionally try and work in lots of different sectors. And one of the things we search for that is this idea of cross-pollination. So we draw in research from different parts of the world, from the transport environment, from the hotel sector, from workplace, from home design, from technology. And it sort of, as we say, it provokes creativity, because you can see the way the different connections of the different industries are in touch with, are stimulating different responses to the same problems. And often we talk about the fact that as soon as we all step outside our houses in the morning, we enter a public space. Whether that's walking through a city street, whether it's being in a hotel environment or a workplace, you're sharing your space with people around you, whether they're friends or colleagues or strangers. And there's a whole load of layers there of industries that are overlapping. And it's fascinating to hear this discussion around Athens and how Athens as a city can re-emerge and reinvent itself and develop over the next decade out of the sort of shadow of the crisis. And the sort of, I think it's a real opportunity to use the change that's going on in the world as a stimulus for the change that you know you need as a city. Clearly, change is also can be damaging as well as a positive. This is an extraordinary image of a bird from the South Pacific who's been killed by consuming plastic, and we know that we also have a responsibility to challenge the things that we can see are going wrong. Being parents of young children, their connection to the digital world is both an extraordinary opportunity but also a very scary reality. And we have to also be bold enough to challenge what we think is wrong about the world as well as right. At the same time, I think we see lots of positivity. That the millennial generation has started to demand new types of engagement, new types of community, and new types of sort of decentralized systems. So, a part of the talk was talking about the fact that the state isn't really supporting Athens in terms of its re-emergence. But maybe these things don't need the state. And I'm not a small state person, but it's clear that business and the society is through this idea of change is beginning to do things in an autonomous way. So, coming back to our work, historically, you could see three very clear differentiators between home, work, and leisure. We're beginning to see those absolutely collide and merge, and they're creating completely new types of space, new types of experience, and new types of product, and new types of business. And we're all a part of that process. Co-working spaces in London was an absolute niche 15 months ago, and now it's becoming an absolute mainstream business model in terms of how people work, how organisations gather together. Co-living, a response to sky-high real estate prices. So, out of this change, we get dozens and dozens of new disruptive businesses that become the kind of interface, a new interface between production and consumption. These businesses are a way of us accessing services through a digital world. And we are at the cusp of an extraordinary transformation of so much of our lives. So, coming back to our beliefs, we really believe that the world of design is to decrypt and interpret this complex world, both as a responsibility and as a joy, because it's a great thing to be able to do. Insight is a word we use a lot, and it's about understanding the world around us. We have to understand the world around us in order to make sense of it and to use it. Empathy is about people. We have to remind ourselves that what we do is about people because we serve our communities. And the next thing we do is serve the world. And relevance is a macro and a micro thing. So we have to be able to be relevant to our communities and our families, but also relevant to society and the planet. And if that means about fuel efficiency or the green agenda or a political position, those things are a very important part of us as designers. And the last piece in this sort of little puzzle is storytelling. Because all those brands that we just saw, they are actually effectively storytellers between models of consumption and production. And as designers, we have to help people make sense of change via narratives, via stories, and via a clear sense of purpose about how our products and services communicate into the future.
So we've got this very complex world, and it's very easy to become myopic and siloed. So one of the things we decided to do when we started the studio was to ensure that we worked in these different disciplines with the hope that we could cross-pollinate, that we could take ideas and learnings from one area into the other. So I'm going to show you just a few projects with Tom now where we try to cross-pollinate and take learnings from one project territory to another. As you can see, we're working in aviation, we're currently working in the ship industry for Virgin Voyages, we're doing healthcare, hospitality, and we're doing a lot of furniture for the workplace. So we've got lots of different sectors which might on the surface seem not to overlap, but actually we find overlaps. One small overlap was this request we had from a British manufacturer called Joseph, you might have bought their products. They make kitchenware, and they said, we'd like you to design a range of waste bins, and we thought this was very unglamorous. And then we thought, well, actually, what can we do with it? And the idea to promote recycling and waste separation, of course, it's great, and we can't continue to throw things away, let them end up in the sea. But how do you do it when you have increased real estate costs, people have smaller and smaller houses, and really what they want to do is just get the rubbish out of their house as quickly as possible? So we made a very simple observation that the competitors were basically selling their existing bins, but just a little bit bigger, so that you could have two compartments from the top. This took up floor space and made small apertures that were difficult to fill. And we thought, well, actually, really what you want to do is preserve space to ensure that people buy the product and use it efficiently. So we basically stacked two bins on top of each other that you could open out separately, and you can reconfigure to either store your bottles until you want to recycle them, your waste paper, or your food. So there were 4 compartments. And out of that, we spawned a new brand for this particular company, and we're already seeing that the competition on the market is changing. So just a small observation about trying to save space, because ultimately that's what recycling is about. This is another project. We were lucky enough to win a pitch for Lufthansa. We've been working with them for a few years to design the next generation of business class seats for 2020 and beyond. We knew we'd be in competition with lots of designers who do lots of amazing pieces of design, and what we thought we'd do is try and think about this word empathy and need, and imagine the type of user that would be using the seat in 2025. So we built a series of little videos where no design was shown, but we tried to talk about function or emotion. So this is one of the function videos where Sven is just plotting out what might happen on a 12-hour journey to Tokyo. Be it working, resting, reading, hiding from the rest of the plane, all these functions that could take place, even communicating with a friend who he's travelling with. And then on an emotional level, we wanted to provoke Lufthansa and say, if you had these different functions that were taking place throughout the journey, surely one vision of that wouldn't be satisfactory to communicate those different moods and tones that would be required. For example, I'm in a work mood, I'm in a resting mood, I'm in a drinking mood, I'm in a moving mood. They're all very, very different states. So we generated another set of movies which were meant to generate a sense of the space. And it was very intentional that we didn't show them any design. Hopefully you're all getting a sense of it sitting there. And what we were trying to do was touch a nerve, to try and find some truth in these things, to make them feel, I get that, I understand what you're trying to communicate. The final product will be 2 to 3 years away, and luckily, for some reason we don't know, Lufthansa chose to publish the work in progress. But what you'll see here in these 2 images is a varied landscape, and this is very unusual in the business class. So the early ideas of saying we'll have these different functions and we'll have these different moods have actually been adopted and are going to actually end up being on the flagship planes in 2020. Now the other thing that was very important here was that we'd be looking for the customer of the future. And so as you can see, we've got two very young, youthful personas here, which was another thing that's going to be very different. So when we're looking forwards to the future, and we've seen this in some of the hotel models here, the future landscape will be a different demographic. And I think what's really important is understanding that the demographic you're designing for today is not going to be the demographic that will be buying it tomorrow. So being able to understand what the near future is absolutely critical.
A lot of what we do is not physical, but it's still very much design. In 2012, we were approached, or we won a competition actually to help deliver an improved service for emergency departments in UK hospitals. So our client was the National Health Service, and they had understood a big. They were trying to tackle a problem about aggressive behaviour in emergency wards. And this was between staff and patients and their friends, family, visitors. Obviously, when you've been injured, it's a high-stress experience anyway, and but there's a collision between highly stressed staff members and highly stressed clients, effectively. And it actually is a significant problem, probably in most emergency departments around the world. And we went back and we started to, we've never worked in this sort of sector before, in sort of service design. In fact, they thought we might come back with a physical story, a physical solution. And we started plotting these diagrams on the wall in the studio, and it was actually a matter of trying to understand what an emergency department was. We finally realised that maybe if everyone had a really clear sense of how and why an emergency department works, they would be less stressed. So we used information as a sort of device to reduce anxiety. And it was a punt. It was very much a sort of judgment about whether this might possibly work. We piloted it across 2 hospitals in the UK, and we had absolutely extraordinary results in terms of reduced anxiety, reduced aggression, and also just an improved sense of service. So this programme, which is a difficult one to explain because it's very small. You see these tall blue columns of information. And basically, in every single cubicle or space in a hospital, in now 15 hospitals in the UK, we have these panels. They're not wayfinding and they're not signage. They are actually telling people why they're there, what they might expect, and what would come next in their progression through the system. So it's very much an understanding about just getting back to the humanity of the user, rather than always imagining that a physical solution might be the one that can deliver the change. We've been working with the Canadian workplace company Technion since 2014, and it's great that one of our friends, sponsors here, is importing this into the Greek market. Workplace is an incredibly dynamic market, and it's been completely unlocked and transformed by technology, and by real estate, and by energy needs. And there's a whole new, luckily for us as furniture designers, furniture has become a much more strategic part of the way you put together organisational space, because people are completely detethered from their workspaces now. Within the sort of knowledge economy, we understand that ideas and collaboration is where you find value and where you find productivity in high-skilled workforces. So it's not about the desk environment anymore. It becomes much more about the environment where you can get together with people and collide and exchange. It's also, as we touched on earlier, there's a lovely mix now between sort of hospitality culture and styling and aesthetics and work culture. And those things are creating new brands, they're creating new types of product, and they're creating new aesthetics. Unfortunately, they're also creating new words like resi-mercial, which is an absolutely appalling word. We're trying to find another way to describe it. I don't know what invented it here. And you can see we're creating new palettes of materials, new formats, and new... it's still made of wood and plastic and metal and fabric. So the actual raw materials are the same as they've always been in an archetypal sense. But we're trying to challenge and break down and put back types of product to make new types of spaces and experiences. We've been working with Intercontinental Hotels since 2011, primarily on the Crown Plaza brand. And what started as a guest room project has ended up as a brand strategy project. This is actually a rendering of a guest room that we've developed over 2 or 3 years with the brand. And it was about trying to reinvent or reimagine a business hotel. We used a lot of the knowledge out of the workplace in terms of how people work today. And what we've done is we created a new ergonomic where the desk is now replaced with a sort of vanity space for layoff and getting ready in the morning. And the corner, this work lounge, is the new workplace for the hotel room. It's just as likely to be a meeting space as a workspace, as a place to eat or a place to watch the television. And then the lounge area and the bed, both facing the TV on the other side, because we know that you multitask and you create this multi-layered experience. Sometimes you're checking your emails while you're watching TV, while you're having a sandwich. Now this product has been just taken up as a global standard for the Crown Plaza brand. They have 480 hotels globally. It's rolling out across North America at the moment, and it's just starting into Europe. And out of that, we were lucky enough to sort of develop a brand strategy for the whole brand, where we've developed a new visual identity, service profile, and a digital experience. So it's become, from a physical project, it's become a complete brand strategy project, which is really, really satisfying and exciting for us. So to finish off, to actually return back to where Luke started, there's this extraordinary balance for us between understanding the world, but also being very in touch with people and with the making process. And as a studio, that's a critical thing for us. And what we've also noticed, and I'm sure you will also know this, the sort of more standardised and global and tech our world becomes, somehow the more need we have for identity and also for what local means and for craft as an idea. And we're all inhabiting a global world, but for instance, Athens as a brand is a very specific local environment, local culture. And we have to understand how we mix this very extraordinary sort of homogeneity across a global context of businesses like Airbnb or Uber or Facebook, or all those big giants, but still needing an absolutely kind of connected sense of the local and the craft and the homemade. And I think we all know that we love our iPhones, but we also need the handmade and the freshly made food and the freshly made clothes. So we just want to finish with, in a way, returning to some of the images that Luke introduced. We're trying to, for us, we are both fascinated and motivated by the sense of understanding the world in the large context, but also being absolutely fascinated and in touch with the detail of how things go together, but also how humans and how us as communities can live and breathe. Thank you.
Actually these live here, seeing and sitting of them. So, of course, would you? Would you mind? So a quick question was that what you actually said at the end is, though we live in a world that changes all the time, and though, yes, we have huge new interfaces and everything changes so radically, what happens actually when the human body is exactly the same as it was? So what's the balance there when you actually design? That you have to be in one place, understanding the changes that happen, and at the same time you have to be on the other side, that something hasn't happened at all. So, which one?
I think, that's what, it's the first word we put up on the slide is archetype. And, the chair is a wonderful thing. It's thousands of years old. Or, sitting on a rock, the same dimension was probably necessary, 10,000 years ago, 70,000 years ago. And I think that understanding that closeness to the reality of the human body is something that really grounds us as designers. the challenges of what goes around it and what makes sense of it that's the collision that we love so much and we enjoy trying to make sense of.
Exactly, yeah, right. And when you see your workspaces and your products, how they work throughout globally, how they work in the UK or how they would work in Athens or in the Mediterranean environment, have you seen that, how they work differently, or is it something that you would like to elaborate on this? Or it's everywhere the same, it's a global language?
I think it is changing. I think up until relatively recently it's been very regional. 7 years ago, European products didn't export to America at all. So the North American market was completely different to Europe, and Europe was quite fragmented. But now we see huge numbers of European companies exporting to America, and we see American companies exporting back over to here. So I think the global sort of reach is definitely changing things from that perspective. You know, the way in which we work is becoming less localized, that's for sure.
So we're going back to archetypes. We think. Thank you very much. Really, it's a great pleasure and an honor.